He smiled when his lawyer said I had no proof, but he stopped smiling the moment the judge opened the blue file in front of everyone. The courtroom went so quiet I could hear the soft buzz of the lights above us and the faint click of a reporter's pen somewhere behind me. I stood alone at the plaintiff's table in a plain black dress I had ironed twice that morning, because it was the only thing I owned that made me feel less like a woman on trial and more like a woman still holding herself together. Across the aisle, Ethan Whitmore sat between two attorneys in charcoal suits that probably cost more than 3 months of my old rent in Queens. He looked like every magazine cover had promised he would look. Calm, wealthy, untouchable. But he would not look at me. Not once. Beside him, his stepmother, Victoria Whitmore, sat with her pearl necklace resting perfectly against her cream blazer. Her lips curved in the smallest victorious smile, like she had already watched my life burn down and was only waiting for the ashes to cool. Brandon Hale, the Whitmore family attorney, rose slowly, smoothing one hand over his tie before turning toward the judge. His voice was polished, expensive, and cruel in the way only powerful people can afford to be. Your Honor, Mrs. Whitmore has made dramatic accusations, but she has produced no credible proof, no original documents, no verified recordings, no financial evidence. Nothing but a story. A low murmur rippled through the room. Cameras shifted. Someone whispered my name like it was already a warning. Clara Bennett, the waitress who married a billionaire. Clara Bennett, the gold digger. Clara Bennett, the girl who thought she could step into one of America's richest families and walk away clean. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table, but I did not lower my head. I had learned a long time ago that humiliation only works when you agree to bow. Judge Evelyn Hart looked down at the stack of motions in front of her, then over her glasses at me. Mrs. Whitmore, she said, her tone steady, not kind, not unkind, just fair. Do you have anything to present before I rule on counsel's motion? Behind me, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Ethan finally moved. Not much. Just enough for me to see his hand close around the armrest of his chair. Maybe he expected me to break. Maybe he expected tears. Maybe he had forgotten the first thing I ever told him 6 months earlier, in his glass office 90 floors above Manhattan. You can rent my name, not my dignity. I lifted my chin and looked straight at the bench. Yes, Your Honor, I said. My voice did not shake. Please open the blue file. Brandon let out a quiet laugh, barely hidden, as if I had just handed the court a grocery list. Victoria's smile widened. Ethan's eyes finally found mine, and for one painful second, I saw the question there. Was any of it real? The bailiff carried the sealed blue folder to the judge. It looked ordinary from a distance, just dark blue cardboard with a white label and my handwriting across the top. But my heart knew every page inside it. Every email I had stayed up copying after midnight. Every bank statement I had printed at a 24-hour copy shop with my last cash. Every timestamp, every signature. Every quiet little truth people like Victoria thought women like me were too scared to keep. Judge Hart broke the seal. Paper whispered against paper. Brandon stopped smiling first. Then Victoria leaned forward. Then Ethan sat perfectly still. The judge read the first page and something changed in her face. Not shock. Recognition. The kind of look a person gets when a locked door opens from the inside. She turned to the second page. Then the third. The courtroom noise faded around me until all I could hear was my own breathing. I was back in Ethan's office the night this began, watching him slide a marriage contract across a black marble desk like he was offering me a job, not a life. I was back in the hospital, counting the seconds between my mother's heart monitor beeps, wondering how much pride a daughter could afford. I was back at the Whitmore mansion, standing under chandeliers while people smiled at me with knives behind their teeth. And I was back in the rain, taking off Ethan's ring after he chose their lie faster than my truth. Judge Hart lifted her eyes from the file. The courtroom froze. Brandon's face had gone pale. Victoria's fingers had stopped touching her pearls. Ethan looked at me now like he was seeing the woman he should have believed before the whole world had to prove her innocent. The judge tapped the blue file once with her hand and said, "Mr. Hale, I suggest you choose your next words very carefully." 6 months earlier, before the courtroom, before the cameras, before Ethan Whitmore looked at me like a mistake he could not undo, I was standing in the hallway of St. Agnes Medical Center with a vending machine coffee cooling between my hands and a hospital bill folded so many times the paper had started to tear at the corners. My mother was asleep behind room 417, a thin blue blanket pulled up to her shoulders, her face softer than it looked when she was awake and pretending not to be afraid. The doctors had explained the surgery in calm voices, the way people do when they are used to saying impossible numbers. Insurance would cover part of it. Not enough. Never enough. I had already sold my car, picked up double shifts at a diner in Queens, and worked mornings as a file clerk for a small legal aid office that smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. I knew how to organize evidence. I knew how to spot a missing signature. I knew how powerful people hid ugly things inside beautiful folders. What I did not know was how to save my mother with $8.37 left in my checking account. My phone buzzed just as the nurse walked past with a clipboard tucked under one arm. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I thought of every job application I had sent that week and answered. "Clara Bennett?" a woman asked. Her voice was crisp, professional, almost too clean. "This is Marlene Price from Whitmore Holdings. Mr. Ethan Whitmore would like to meet with you tonight." I looked down at my shoes, still damp from the subway platform. "I am sorry, who?" "Ethan Whitmore," she repeated, as if people only asked that question when they were trying to be funny. "He has a private matter requiring discretion. A car will arrive for you in 30 minutes. I should have said no. I should have asked how he knew my name. But through the small window in my mother's door, I could see the machines glowing beside her bed, steady and patient, waiting for money I did not have. So I went. The black town car took me into Manhattan, through streets shining after rain, past restaurants where people paid more for dinner than I made in a week. Whitmore Tower rose above the city like it owned the sky. 90 floors of glass, steel, and silence. By the time I stepped into Ethan's office, my coat felt too cheap, my purse too worn, my whole life too small. He stood by the window with the city burning gold behind him, tall, clean-shaven, white shirt open at the collar, sleeves rolled just enough to make him look human on purpose. He did not smile. "Miss Bennett," he said, "thank you for coming." On his desk sat one thing. A contract. Thick, cream-colored paper. A silver pen placed beside it like a surgical instrument. "I need a wife for 6 months," he said, as if he were ordering a replacement part. I stared at him. "Excuse me." He walked to the desk and turned the first page toward me. "My father's trust requires me to be married before the annual board review, or controlling shares shift to my stepmother. It is outdated, absurd, and legally inconvenient. But it is binding." I laughed once because the alternative was crying. "So you found a broke woman and thought she would be legally convenient too?" His jaw tightened. "I found someone with no public profile, no scandal, and experience handling confidential documents." "You found someone desperate." He did not deny it. That was the first thing I hated about him and maybe the first thing I respected. He slid another page forward. "Your mother's medical expenses will be paid in full. Your rent. Your debts. At the end of 6 months you receive a settlement large enough to start over. In return you attend public events, live at my residence, and keep the terms private." My hand stayed in my lap, but my heart was pounding so hard it felt visible. Outside, Manhattan glittered like nothing bad ever happened to anyone who lived above the 60th floor. I thought of my mother's hand in mine. I thought of the eviction notice under my apartment door. I thought of the way rich men called survival a choice when they were not the ones drowning. I picked up the pen, then stopped. "I want one condition added." Ethan looked at me for the first time like I had surprised him. "What condition?" I turned the last page around and wrote it myself in black ink. "No public humiliation." Then I looked him straight in the eyes. "You can rent my name, Mr. Whitmore. Not my dignity." For a moment he said nothing. Then he took the pen from my hand, signed beneath my words, and pushed a small velvet box across the desk. Inside was a diamond ring that caught the office lights like ice. I did not put it on right away. I looked at the contract first, then at him, and somewhere deep inside me, a quiet voice whispered that the most dangerous papers are not the ones people hide from you. They are the ones they ask you to sign. The wedding happened 3 days later in a courthouse chapel 2 blocks from City Hall, under fluorescent lights that made every face look a little tired and every promise sound like paperwork. There were no flowers, no music, No family smiling from polished wooden benches. Only Ethan, me, a clerk with red glasses, and Marlene Price standing near the door with a tablet pressed to her chest like the entire ceremony was just another meeting squeezed between calls. I wore a cream dress Ethan's assistant had sent to my apartment in a garment bag that still smelled like an expensive boutique. It fit perfectly, which somehow made me feel worse. My mother thought it was a small private wedding because Ethan valued discretion. I let her believe that because her surgery had been approved that morning, and when she cried over the phone calling it a miracle, I could not bring myself to tell her the miracle had a signature line. Ethan wore a navy suit and a watch so understated it was probably worth more than my neighborhood diner. When the clerk asked us to exchange rings, he took my hand with careful distance, like touching me was also covered somewhere in section 12. The diamond slid onto my finger, cold and heavy. I looked down at it and thought of all the women who dreamed of a ring like that, never knowing how much one could weigh when love was not inside it. Ethan repeated the vows clearly, respectfully, without hesitation. I repeated mine softer, for better, for worse. The words almost made me laugh. We had started with worse and were calling it business. Afterward, Marlene handed me a dark blue folder with copies of everything. The marriage license, the private agreement, the confidentiality terms, the payment schedule, and the page where my handwriting sat between all those printed clauses like a bruise. No public humiliation. For your records, she said. I held the folder against my chest. Ethan noticed. You will not need that, he said. I keep records, I answered. People forget what they promise when it becomes inconvenient. His eyes rested on me for a second too long, but he said nothing. That afternoon I moved into the Whitmore residence, a limestone mansion on the Upper East Side with black iron gates, marble stairs, and rooms so quiet they seemed offended by footsteps. A housekeeper named Mrs. Alvarez greeted me kindly, but the rest of the staff watched me with trained blank faces, the kind that said they already knew a story about me and had decided not to question it. My suite was larger than my entire apartment in Queens. It had pale curtains, fresh white roses, a bathroom with heated floors, and a closet filled with clothes I had never chosen. On the bed sat a printed schedule. Breakfast with Ethan at 7. Charity luncheon Thursday. Board dinner Friday. Whitmore Foundation Gala next week. Media training every morning until further notice. I stared at the list and felt the walls of my new life closing in. Not from poverty this time, but from polish. That evening, Ethan found me in the library, where shelves rose 20 feet high and a fire glowed behind a brass screen. He handed me another document. Household expectations, he said. I looked at the pages. Separate bedrooms. No unapproved interviews. No discussion of personal finances. No physical affection except what was necessary for public appearances. No interference with Whitmore Holdings. You really do turn everything into a contract, I said. Contracts prevent confusion. No, I said, looking up. Trust prevents confusion. Contracts just prove there was none. His expression tightened, not with anger exactly, but with something more private. Before he could answer, the library doors opened and Victoria Whitmore stepped inside. In person, she was even more polished than her photos. Blonde hair swept into a smooth twist, pale blue eyes sharp enough to cut ribbon. She looked me over slowly, from the borrowed dress to the borrowed ring, and smiled. So this is her, she said. Not Clara. Not your wife. Her. Ethan's shoulders stiffened. Victoria. She moved closer, the scent of expensive perfume arriving before she did. You work quickly, Ethan. Your father would have admired the efficiency, if not the taste. I felt the words land, but I kept my face still. Ethan said nothing. Not one word. Victoria turned to me, her smile never changing. I hope you understand, dear, that a ring can get you through the front door. It does not make you belong in the room. My fingers tightened around the blue folder. I thought of hospital bills, subway rain, my mother sleeping under a thin blanket, and the line I had written in black ink. Then I smiled back, small and calm. That is fine, Mrs. Whitmore, I said. I have spent my whole life entering rooms where people thought I did not belong. I usually learn the exits first. For the first time, Victoria's smile flickered. Ethan looked at me as if he had expected me to break, and found something else standing there instead. But he still did not defend me, and that silence told me exactly what kind of marriage I had signed up for. The first week inside the Whitmore mansion felt like learning a foreign language where every word was made of money. There was a fork for food I could not pronounce, a tone of voice for people you secretly disliked, and a smile that meant yes in public but absolutely not behind closed doors. Every morning, I sat through media training with a woman named Celeste who taught me how to turn my shoulders toward cameras, how to pause before answering personal questions, and how to say the words "we are very happy" without sounding like I was reading them from a hostage note. In the afternoons, a stylist pinned dresses around me while assistants debated whether navy made me look trustworthy or emerald made me look expensive. No one asked what made me feel like myself. That part of me had apparently not been included in the contract. Ethan was rarely home before midnight. When he was, he moved through the house like a man passing through a hotel he owned but did not enjoy. We had breakfast together because the schedule required it, 2 white plates, black coffee, the Wall Street Journal folded beside his hand, and silence sitting between us like a third person. Sometimes I caught him watching me when he thought I was not looking, not warmly, not cruelly, but with a kind of calculation that made me want to ask if he was trying to understand me or simply reduce me to a risk. The first real test came at the Whitmore Foundation donor luncheon, held in a private room overlooking Central Park. It was the kind of room where sunlight poured over white tablecloths and every laugh sounded rehearsed. Victoria arrived in pale gray silk with Madison veil beside her, Ethan's former fiancée, a woman with glossy blonde hair, perfect posture, and the relaxed confidence of someone who had never had to wonder whether her debit card would decline at a grocery store. Madison hugged Ethan for half a second too long, then turned to me with bright, empty eyes. "Clara," she said, "how brave of you to adjust so quickly." Brave. As if poverty were an accent I was trying to lose. During lunch, she asked me which schools I had attended, which clubs my family belonged to, whether my parents had a place in the Hamptons. Each question was wrapped in sugar and dipped in poison. I answered simply, community college for 2 semesters before my mother got sick. No clubs. No Hamptons. Just Queens hospital parking lots, and a diner where I could carry 6 plates without dropping one. A few people looked away embarrassed for me. Madison smiled wider. Then a waiter leaned between us with a tray of cranberry spritzers, and her elbow shifted just enough for one glass to tip directly into my lap. Red spread across the cream dress like a public announcement. The table went quiet. Madison gasped softly. "Oh no, I am so sorry. These things happen." Victoria lowered her eyes to hide her satisfaction. Ethan stood halfway, then stopped, trapped between instinct and image. I felt every stare in the room. My skin burned. For 1 second, I wanted to run to the restroom and stay there until the city forgot my name. Instead, I picked up my napkin, pressed it to the stain and smiled at the waiter first. "It is all right. Accidents are only embarrassing when people pretend they are not accidents." Madison's face changed by a fraction. Small but enough. I excused myself, cleaned what I could in the restroom, and stared at my reflection under the soft gold lights. The dress was ruined. My pride was not. When I returned, the table had moved on to the Foundation's new affordable housing initiative. A silver-haired donor was questioning whether Whitmore Holdings should attach itself to unstable neighborhoods. I heard the phrase and felt something in me go still. Before Ethan could answer, I set my napkin down and spoke. With respect, neighborhoods are not unstable because poor people live there. They become unstable when investors treat families like numbers on a spreadsheet. The donor blinked. Victoria's fork paused above her plate. Ethan turned toward me. I continued, my voice calm, my hands folded so no one could see they were shaking. I talked about eviction filings, hospital debt, commute times, single mothers working double shifts, and the legal aid office where I had watched people lose homes because no one explained the papers shoved under their doors. I did not use big words to impress them. I used real ones because real things do not need decoration. When I finished, no one laughed. The silver-haired donor cleared his throat and said, "That was unusually direct, Mrs. Whitmore." I looked at him. Direct is not the same as rude. It is just harder to ignore. Across the table, Ethan's expression had shifted. Not softened exactly. Sharpened. Like a man realizing a tool he had purchased was actually a compass. After the luncheon, he found me near the coat room, still holding the ruined fabric away from my knees. For once, he did not mention optics or schedules. He only said, "You handled that well." I gave him a tired smile. Which part? The drink or the room full of people discussing poverty like it was a weather pattern? His mouth almost curved. Almost. Then he reached for his phone and called his driver. We are stopping somewhere before home. 20 minutes later, the car pulled up outside St. Agnes Medical Center. I turned to him confused. Ethan looked out the window, not at me. Your mother's nurse said visiting hours end at 8. You have 40 minutes. I did not know what to say. So I said nothing. I just stepped out into the evening air with a stained dress, a borrowed ring, and the unsettling feeling that the man who had hired me to pretend might have just done the first real thing since I met him. After that night at the hospital, something quiet shifted between us, so small no one else in the mansion would have noticed, but I felt it in the spaces where silence used to cut. Ethan still left early and came home late, still answered calls in that low controlled voice, still treated his calendar like a court order, but he began leaving a fresh coffee beside my plate at breakfast, exactly the way I liked it, with cream and no sugar. He started asking about my mother's recovery, not like a man checking an expense report, but like someone who remembered her name. Once, when Mrs. Alvarez mentioned the heater in my old apartment building had broken again, Ethan disappeared for 20 minutes and returned with grease on the cuff of his shirt. He had not sent a repairman. He had gone himself. I found that out from my neighbor, who called laughing because a billionaire had been standing in our basement arguing politely with a furnace from the 1980s. I told myself not to be touched by it. Kindness could be strategy. Softness could be another form of control. But then came the night I found him in the garage. It was after midnight, rain tapping lightly against the windows, the mansion asleep around us. I had gone downstairs for water and heard a sound behind the side door. Not loud, not dramatic, just one sharp breath pulled in too fast. Ethan was sitting on the concrete floor beside a black vintage car. His suit jacket tossed over the bumper, his tie loose, one hand pressed against his chest while the other gripped his phone so hard his knuckles had turned white. For the first time since I met him, he did not look untouchable. He looked young, tired, human in a way that expensive lighting never allowed. Ethan, I said softly. His head snapped up. Go back inside. The words were automatic, but there was no strength behind them. I stepped closer anyway. Are you having chest pain? No. Trouble breathing? Clara. That is not an answer. His eyes closed for a second, and the mask cracked just enough for the truth to show through. It happens sometimes after bored calls. I lowered myself to sit a few feet away, leaving space between us because I understood pride even when it wore a custom suit. The garage smelled like rain, leather, and cold metal. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said, my father made me sign my first company document when I was 18. I did not understand half of it. He said understanding was optional. Obedience was not. His voice stayed even, but his hand trembled against his knee. Every mistake after that was mine. Every success was his. When he died, he left the company tied to conditions like he was still in the room, still testing whether I could earn what everyone already thinks I was born owning. I looked at him, this man people called ruthless because no one had bothered to ask who taught him that love had to be earned through performance. Part of me wanted to comfort him. Another part, the part that had stood under Victoria's smile and Ethan's silence, refused to excuse him. That explains your fear, I said. It does not excuse your cruelty. He turned toward me, surprised, maybe even hurt. Good. Some truths should sting before they heal. You let them humiliate me, I continued, quieter now. You watched people treat me like a receipt you could file away when this was over. And maybe you did not mean to be cruel, but silence can do the job just fine. The rain tapped harder against the small garage windows. Ethan looked down at his hands. I know. 2 words. Not polished. Not strategic. Just broken enough to be real. I stood, went to the small sink near the wall, filled a glass with water, and brought it back to him. He took it carefully, our fingers almost touching. Almost. You do not have to be a machine in front of me, I said. He gave a tired laugh with no humor in it. I am not sure I know how to be anything else. Then start badly, I said. Most honest things do. He looked at me, then really looked, and for once there was no calculation in his eyes. Only exhaustion, regret, and something dangerously close to trust. The next morning at breakfast, Victoria made a comment about my stained gala dress being a lesson in knowing one's place. Before I could answer, Ethan set down his coffee. The sound was soft, but the room went still. "Her place is at this table," he said. "And anyone who has a problem with that can leave it." Victoria's smile froze. My spoon paused above my oatmeal. Ethan did not look at me, but he did not need to. For the first time, he had kept the condition he signed in black ink. No public humiliation. And because of that, the diamond on my finger felt a little less like ice and a little more like a question I was not ready to answer. For a little while, I let myself believe the worst part of the arrangement was behind us. That was how trouble entered the room, not with shouting, not with slammed doors, but quietly, wearing the shape of peace. Ethan began coming home before dinner. Sometimes we ate in the library instead of the formal dining room because he said the long table made every meal feel like a negotiation. He asked about my old legal aid office, about the families I had helped sort through eviction papers and medical debt claims. I told him about Mrs. Delgado, who nearly lost her apartment because one signature had been placed on the wrong line. I told him about men in expensive suits who used confusing language because plain English would have made their lies too easy to see. Ethan listened. Really listened. Then one afternoon, he brought me a stack of Whitmore Foundation grant proposals and asked what I thought. Not for appearance. Not because a photographer was nearby. Because he wanted my eyes on the pages. I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt that old file clerk instinct wake up inside me, the part of me that noticed what other people rushed past. A missing attachment number. A duplicated vendor code. A signature placed slightly too low. The first strange document came from a proposed community redevelopment project in Newark, a $50 million investment Ethan claimed he had approved 2 years earlier. His name was on the authorization page, bold and confident in blue ink. But I had seen Ethan sign dozens of papers by then. He crossed the T in Whitmore with a hard straight line. This signature curved upward. Almost elegant. Almost rehearsed. I stared at it too long. Something wrong? Ethan asked from across the desk. I closed the folder. Maybe nothing. He gave me a look. "Clara, I want to check something before I say it out loud." That night, after he went to a late meeting, I sat alone in the library with my laptop, the blue folder open beside me. The mansion was quiet except for the old clock near the fireplace and the distant sound of tires moving over wet pavement outside. I compared the signature to 3 others. Then 5. Then 12. My stomach sank slowly, inch by inch. It was not Ethan's signature. It was close enough to fool someone who wanted to move fast, but not close enough to fool someone who had spent years watching desperate people lose everything over details. I began pulling more files from the digital archive Marlene had given me access to for foundation work. Vendor payments. Offshore consulting fees. Real estate transfers under shell companies with names so plain they felt designed to disappear. The same pattern kept appearing. Documents supposedly approved by Ethan, routed through Brandon Hale, then quietly benefiting entities connected to Victoria's private investment circle. I should have taken it to Ethan immediately. I know that now. But at the time, trust still felt fragile between us, like glass warming near a fire. If I was wrong, I would look paranoid. If I was right, I would be handing him proof that his own house had been stealing from under his name. So I did what I had been trained to do. I made copies. I printed timestamps. I saved emails to an external drive. I placed everything inside the blue folder beneath the original contract, the marriage license, and that single handwritten sentence I had added before my life changed. No public humiliation. Each night the folder grew heavier. Each morning Victoria smiled at me over breakfast like a woman measuring curtains for a room she planned to own. The warning came from Mrs. Alvarez on a Thursday evening. She found me in the pantry, slipping printed pages into my tote bag, and her face went pale. "Be careful, Mrs. Whitmore," she whispered. "In this house, people do not lose because they are wrong. They lose because they speak too soon." I asked her what she meant, but she only shook her head and hurried away. 2 days later, Madison appeared at the mansion with a bottle of champagne and a story about planning a charity auction. Victoria greeted her like family. Ethan was still at the office. I was passing the study when I heard my name through the cracked door. "She is getting too comfortable," Madison said. Victoria answered softly, almost bored. Comfort makes people careless. Then Brandon's voice cut in, smooth as polished stone. If Mrs. Whitmore has been accessing confidential company records, we can make that useful. My hand went cold around the blue folder. I stepped back before the floor could creak. That was when I understood. The forged signatures were not the only trap. I was being placed in the middle of it, page by page, until the evidence I gathered to protect Ethan could be twisted into evidence against me. That night, Ethan came home with rain on his coat and tiredness in his eyes. He found me standing in the bedroom, the blue folder hidden beneath folded sweaters in my suitcase. "You look scared," he said. I almost told him everything. I wanted to. The words rose to my throat, warm and urgent. But then his phone lit up on the table. "Victoria." He glanced at the screen, and the old Ethan returned for half a second, guarded, trained, loyal to blood even when blood had poisoned the room. So I swallowed the truth. "I am just tired," I said. He came closer, searching my face. "Clara, if something is wrong, tell me." I touched the ring on my finger, feeling its weight, wondering whether love could survive the kind of truth that arrived with receipts. "Not yet," I whispered. "I need to be sure first." The trap closed on a Sunday morning, which felt almost cruel, because sunlight was coming through the mansion windows and Mrs. Alvarez had placed blueberry pancakes on the breakfast table like the house had decided to pretend it was gentle. Ethan was reading a report across from me, one hand resting near his coffee, his wedding ring catching a small line of light. I was about to tell him everything. I had barely slept the night before. The blue folder was hidden in my suitcase, but the truth was sitting inside my chest, pressing so hard I could hardly breathe around it. Then Victoria walked in with Brandon Hale behind her, and the room changed temperature. She wore white, of course. People like Victoria always chose innocence when they planned to destroy someone. Brandon carried a slim leather case and looked at me with the calm sympathy of a man arriving at a funeral he had arranged. Ethan lowered the report. "What is this?" Victoria did not sit. She placed a flash drive on the table between us. "Small. Black. Ordinary. Something you need to hear before your board meeting tomorrow." My stomach tightened. Ethan looked from the flash drive to me. "About what?" "About your wife," Brandon said. The word wife sounded strange in his mouth, like an accusation wearing formal clothes. Ethan's face hardened, but he did not reach for the drive. "Be careful, Brandon." Victoria gave a soft sigh. "We have been careful. Too careful, perhaps. That is why she got this far." I stood slowly. "Whatever this is, you need to check the source." Brandon smiled. "That is exactly what we did." He opened his laptop and plugged in the drive. A recording began to play through the small speakers, my voice, clear enough to turn the room silent. I heard myself say Ethan's name. Then the sound skipped. Another sentence followed, stitched too smoothly. "The files are worth more if they prove he signed them." My blood went cold. It was my voice but not my meaning. Pieces of calls, office conversations, things I had said in different rooms on different days, cut together until I sounded like a woman selling secrets. Ethan did not look at the laptop. He looked at me. That was worse. "It is edited," I said too quickly. Ethan listened to me. "That is not the full recording." Brandon clicked another file. Screenshots appeared next. My login credentials. Download logs. Internal documents opened under my account. The same files I had copied to protect him, now arranged like evidence of betrayal. Victoria's voice softened into something almost maternal. "She used your access, Ethan. Your home. Your trust." Trust. The word landed between us like broken glass. "I was gathering proof," I said. "The signatures are forged. Money is moving through shell accounts connected to Victoria. I can show you." Brandon lifted one eyebrow. "Convenient accusation." "It is not an accusation. It is in the folder." "What folder?" Ethan asked. My heart stumbled. For 1 second I saw the path opening. "Tell him. Run upstairs. Bring it down. End this now." But Victoria was already smiling. We searched her room after security flagged the downloads. I turned toward her. "You did what?" Brandon slid a photograph across the table. My suitcase. Open. Closed, disturbed. No blue folder. Only a few printed pages left behind, selected, rearranged, stripped of context. There was no complete file, he said. Only stolen documents. The room tilted, but I stayed standing. Where is it? My voice was quiet. Where is my folder? Victoria looked almost bored. You are confused, dear. I looked at Ethan. She took it. Ethan, please. You know I keep records. You saw me keep that folder from the day we signed. His jaw tightened. I could see the war inside him. The man from the garage fighting the boy trained to obey family and fear scandal. But Brandon knew exactly where to press. The board meets tomorrow. If this becomes public, the company loses the merger, your father's trust triggers review, and Victoria gains temporary control. Unless we act now. Ethan closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, they were not cold. Cold would have hurt less. They were wounded. Was any of this ever real to you? I stared at him. That is what you are asking me? Clara. Not whether the recording is fake. Not whether the signatures are forged. Not why I would risk everything to gather proof. You are asking if I fooled you. His silence answered before his mouth did. Something inside me folded neat and final. I pulled the diamond ring from my finger. It took effort, as if the months had taught my skin to hold on. I placed it on the table beside the flash drive. Metal against wood. A small sound, but everyone heard it. The contract was fake, I said. My loyalty was not. Ethan reached toward me, then stopped, like even now he was waiting for permission from a room full of liars. That was when I picked up my purse and walked out of the Whitmore mansion with nothing but my phone, my old coat, and the one thing they did not know I had already done. 3 days earlier, before Victoria stole the blue folder from my room, I had mailed a sealed copy to Judge Evelyn Hart, because women like me learn early that if truth matters, you do not leave it in a house owned by the people who need it buried. The 3 weeks between leaving the mansion and standing in court felt longer than the 6 months I had lived as Mrs. Whitmore. Victoria filed the lawsuit first, of course. People with money like to name the story before anyone else can tell the truth. Fraud. Theft of confidential documents. Breach of contract. Attempted extortion. The headlines arrived before I even found a place to sleep that first night. Glowing on my phone while I sat in a corner booth of the same diner where I used to work double shifts. My old manager, Denise, did not ask questions. She slid a plate of toast in front of me and said, "Eat before you start being brave." I wanted to laugh, but my throat hurt too much. Ethan did not call. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not when reporters stood outside St. Agnes Medical Center asking my mother if she knew her daughter had married for money. That was the part one almost could not forgive before the trial even began. Not the lawsuit. Not the lies. The silence. The way his doubt had stepped back and let the world do what he had promised it never would. My mother held my hand from her hospital bed and asked if I had done what they said. I told her no. She nodded once, tired but certain. Then stand straight when they lie, she whispered. Truth needs a spine. So I stood straight. I met with a public interest attorney named Rachel Kim in a narrow office above a pharmacy in Brooklyn. She read my notes, my timeline, my copies of emails, and the receipt from the certified mail I had sent to Judge Evelyn Hart 3 days before Victoria's trap closed. Rachel looked up at me with the kind of respect no designer dress had ever given me. You did not just save evidence, she said. You built a record. By the morning of the hearing, the courthouse steps were crowded with cameras, shareholders, gossip reporters, and people who loved watching a woman fall as long as she fell from somewhere expensive. I walked through them in my black dress, carrying no purse, no jewelry, no ring. Just myself. Inside, Brandon performed like a man who believed the room belonged to him. He described me as ambitious, manipulative, and emotionally unstable. All with the polite rhythm of someone reading a weather report. Victoria sat behind him, serene and perfect. Ethan sat at the defense table, his face pale beneath the courtroom lights. When Brandon played the edited recording, people shifted in their seats. When he showed the download logs, someone behind me whispered, "She really did it." I kept my eyes on the judge. Rachel objected calmly, page by page, but Brandon kept smiling because he thought the blue folder was gone. Then Judge Hart asked if I had anything further to present, and the room returned to the moment where everything had started to crack open. "Please open the blue file," I said. The bailiff brought it forward. The judge broke the seal. The first page was the original marriage agreement, including my handwritten clause and Ethan's signature beneath it. No public humiliation. Judge Hart read it silently, then moved to the next page. A chain of emails from Victoria to Brandon, discussing how to reframe Clara's access as theft if she found the redevelopment transfers. Brandon's smile vanished. Rachel rose. Your Honor. Those emails were preserved with full headers and server timestamps. The third page showed the offshore accounts, each transfer mapped to a consulting company tied to Victoria's private trust. The fourth page showed Ethan's authentic signatures beside the forged ones, line by line, cross by cross, with a forensic comparison from an independent document examiner. Ethan leaned forward then, his eyes moving over the projected images as if every false signature were a door closing on the life he thought he understood. Then came the audio. Rachel played the full recording, not the chopped version Brandon had used at breakfast. My voice filled the courtroom, calm and careful, saying, "The files are worth more if they prove he signed them, but only if the signatures are real. If they are forged, Ethan is being framed." The room went silent in a different way now. Not hungry. Ashamed. Judge Hart turned one page more. At the back of the folder was my letter, the one I had written and never sent, explaining why I waited, why I copied everything, why I was afraid Ethan would protect his family before he protected the truth. My cheeks burned as the judge read the first lines, but I did not look away. Some truths are private until powerful people force them into daylight. Judge Hart set the letter down and looked directly at Brandon. "Mr. Hale, these materials suggest possible fabrication of evidence submitted to this court." Brandon opened his mouth, but nothing polished came out. Victoria stood too quickly, pearls shifting against her collar. "This is absurd." The judge's voice sharpened. "Sit down, Mrs. Whitmore." Two deputies moved near Brandon's table, not roughly, not dramatically, just close enough for everyone to understand that power had changed sides. Ethan finally turned toward me. His face held shock first, then grief, then something deeper and worse, recognition. He knew now. He knew I had protected him while he doubted me. He knew I had carried the truth out of his house because his house had never been safe for it. And when Judge Hart tapped the blue folder and ordered a formal investigation into Victoria and Brandon's actions, Ethan lowered his head, not like a billionaire losing control, but like a man realizing the woman he failed had been the only honest person in the room. The investigation did not end with shouting or spectacle. It ended the way powerful lies often end when someone finally follows the paper trail. In quiet offices under bright conference room lights, with signatures, subpoenas, and people suddenly forgetting the things they once said with confidence. Brandon Hale resigned before the Bar Association could finish its review, but resignation did not erase what he had filed in court. Victoria stepped down from every Whitmore board position within 48 hours, her name removed from charity plaques, investment committees, and the glossy brochures where she had once smiled like generosity itself. The news called it a corporate scandal. My mother called it proof that God still reads fine print. Ethan called me every day for 2 weeks. I did not answer. Not because I wanted to punish him, though maybe part of me did. I did not answer because forgiveness is not a doorbell. You do not press it and expect someone to open. I moved back to Queens while my mother recovered, into a smaller apartment with uneven floors, noisy pipes, and morning sunlight that came through the kitchen window like a blessing. Rachel Kim offered me a full-time position at her legal aid office, and for the first time in months, I signed papers that belonged only to me. No marriage clause. No confidentiality terms. No diamond heavy on my finger. Just my name, Clara Bennett, and a salary that would not impress anyone at a gala but felt honest enough to sleep beside. Ethan sent flowers once. I donated them to the nurses' station at St. Agnes. He sent a handwritten apology next. I read it twice, then folded it into the back of a drawer because the words were beautiful, but beautiful words had never been the problem. 3 months later, on a cold Tuesday morning, I walked into our new community legal clinic in Brooklyn, and stopped so suddenly Rachel nearly bumped into me. Ethan Whitmore was standing by the reception desk with no security, no tailored entourage, no expensive performance. Just a dark coat, tired eyes, and a framed blue folder held carefully in both hands. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Around us, phones rang, printers hummed, and a woman near the waiting area bounced a toddler gently on her knee while filling out housing forms. Real life kept moving. Ethan looked smaller there than he ever had in the mansion, not weak, just stripped of the height money had always given him. "I know I should have called first," he said. "You did. Many times." His mouth tightened. "You were right not to answer." He set the frame on the counter between us. Inside was the cover of the blue file, preserved behind glass. Beneath it, on a small silver plate, were the words, "The day truth saved me from myself." I stared at it longer than I meant to. "That sounds expensive." "It was made by the same framing shop your legal aid office uses for community awards," he said. $38 before tax. I looked up despite myself. Ethan gave the faintest smile. "I am learning appropriate scale." There it was, the old almost humor, but softer now, less armored. He reached into his coat and took out a single blank sheet of paper. No letterhead. No logo. No signatures. He placed it beside the frame. "I did not come with a proposal," he said. "Or a contract. Or a settlement. That is new for you. I deserved that." His voice stayed steady, but his eyes did not hide from mine. "I believed evidence manufactured by people who benefited from destroying you. I let fear speak louder than the woman who had already shown me the truth of her character. I cannot undo that. I will not ask you to pretend it did not happen." My throat tightened, but I kept my hands still at my sides. "Then what are you asking for?" Ethan looked at the blank page. "A chance to earn trust without terms. One day at a time. And if the answer is no, I will still fund the clinic anonymously, as long as Rachel can structure it without touching your independence." Behind me, Rachel made a small approving sound and pretended to check the copier. I almost laughed. Almost. I thought about the courthouse, the mansion, the garage in the rain, the way his hand had stopped reaching for me when I needed him to choose. Then I thought about this office, about people waiting with eviction notices and medical bills, about truth needing a spine, about love needing more than regret. "Love without trust is just another contract," I said. Ethan nodded once. "I know. And trust is not restored because you finally feel sorry. I know that too." His humility did not fix everything. But it did not feel borrowed. It did not feel rehearsed. It stood there quietly, without demanding applause. I picked up the blank paper, folded it once, and handed it back to him. "Start with coffee," I said. "A public place. No drivers. No press. No promises you have not earned." For the first time since the trial, Ethan smiled like a man who had been given something greater than forgiveness. He had been given a beginning. Months later, when the Whitmore Foundation announced a permanent legal defense fund for families trapped by debt, contracts, and quiet intimidation, my name was not on the donor wall because I asked for it that way. But in the clinic hallway, near the waiting room, the framed blue file hung under soft morning light. People passed it every day without knowing the whole story. They only saw the words beneath it and sometimes stopped to read them twice. And every time I walked by, coffee in one hand, case files in the other, I remembered the woman I had been in that courtroom, standing alone while everyone waited for me to break. I had thought justice would feel like winning. It did not. It felt like walking out with my name still mine, my dignity still whole, and my heart finally wise enough to know that being loved by a powerful man meant nothing unless he was brave enough to stand beside the truth.